Welcome back. It's a beautiful day. You have lots of incentives to come back here as well. This is a great panel, Trade, Migration, and Wage Premium in China. I was just telling my colleague Chao Wei that when we were in Beijing on this last time on the Fulbright, one of the things that the Fulbright office asked us to do is to look at the process of the Gaokao exam, the actual exam at the end of the year for the high school kids. And we were amazed how the town died. No action, no telephone, no cell towers around a lot of the exam centers. So I'm looking forward to the second paper as well on the truth and illusion of the college entrance exam. Because we actually may have been fraught with illusion because we came back to the embassy saying wonderful things about it. The state police will come and pick up a kid. God forbid he shouldn't show up to take a test. I wonder if we could do that here. Anyway, it's my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Chao Wei, who's going to present the first paper.
Okay, thanks for coming. So today I'm talking about my work on the long and short of trade and migration reforms in China. It's co-authored work with Xiaodong Zhu from University of Toronto. So we are still working on producing preliminary results. So today I'm going to focus more on the rationale and the setup of our model. So ever since the mid-1990s, there has been a large-scale interprovincial migration from inland to coastal areas. So these migrations are driven by thriving export industries in the coastal areas and also and accompanied by trade and migration reforms. For example, in 2003, some coastal provinces have no longer required temporary residency permits to work in those provinces. So those trade and migration reforms have been credited with benefits. They have been credited with narrowing economic disparities by providing job opportunities to inland migrant workers, and also due to the better resource allocation also contributing to productivity growth. In this paper, we want to actually call attention to the difference between the short-run and the long-run effects of trade and migration reforms. So the long-run effects we look at are the impact of trade and migration reforms on human capital investment, scale premium, income inequality, and aggregate productivity in the long run. We want to argue that if the migration reform is not complete, so if it's a partial migration reform, we argue that the long-run effects actually can be adverse. It may discourage human capital investment and raise the scale premium and create more income inequality down the road. So what do I mean by partial migration reforms? I'd like to first talk a little bit about the hukou registration system. So in China, there's a hukou registration system where people are registered by location, by the city, the town, the province, and also by category, whether it's rural registration or urban registration. And the permanent migration, so change your registration to different location and different categories, are strictly regulated and can be very difficult to move from small cities to large cities, from inland to coastal areas. So the hukou system is really like an internal passport. It serves two functions. First, it's a work permit, and the second, it's an entitlement distribution mechanism. Okay? So in terms of entitlement distribution mechanism, we talk about access to local health care, child care, schooling for children, those social services. So when we talk about the partial reforms, we are talking about the reforms like carried out in 2003, which reduce restriction on working in cities. So basically, these reduce costs on temporary migration What we mean by complete reforms is on the second aspect, not only, work, make it easier to work, but also provide access or reduce costs of migrants to access the healthcare, childcare, schooling for children in local area. So we feel that's the part we call it complete reform. Why we think that the partial reform might have adverse effects? Because when you look at the social access to social service part, so the healthcare, childcare, and the schooling for children are actually very important for middle-aged migrants compared to young migrants who are like 16, 17, 18-year-old. Okay? So basically, restricted access to the entitlement to the social services essentially are biased against middle-aged migrants. Okay? So when there's a partial reform, which makes it easier to work, so such a partial reform, in a way, you make it easier for young migrants to work in coastal areas, but still doesn't provide any relief to the middle-aged migrants, middle-aged individuals. So in the end, we think about the age. What do people do when they are 16 or 17 or 18-year-old? That's a time to go to high school. That's a time to maybe pursue college education. But the partial reform might entice those young people actually to go to work as a migrant instead of pursue their education in high school and college. So in the long run, it have adverse effect on the income equality issues. So I want to show you some data. This is the data from the Census Data in 2005. So we look at the monthly labor income gap. So we look at there are inland and coastal areas. These are monthly labor income. And just for illustration, we separate into agriculture and non-agricultural sectors. So as you can see, if someone working inland agricultural sector, the monthly income is 279 yuan. However, if he move to coastal area, non-agricultural sector, so he have 1,024 yuan. So that's enticement to work in the coastal areas. So this large income gap represents both, opportunity for the migrants to go to work, but also demonstrate that there are huge migration costs there. Because if there are no migration costs, we would expect some equalization wage across those areas, but there are huge difference there. Okay? So if you look at which group is have the highest income, the group which are in coastal area, have college education, work in non-agricultural sector, the monthly income is 2,249. So if you look at some young people in inland have a rural registration, so they need to consider the trade-off. If they go to college but still stay in agricultural sector, it's 717 yuan this income. But if they go work as a migrant, not college educated, they can get 1,000 yuan now. But if they are able to migrate permanently and stay in the coastal area and work in non-agricultural sector, the college education might be worthwhile. So those are the income gap we are looking at here. So when you look at the income gap, you can say, as I say, you both see the enticement and also see the costs of migration. So in this graph, I want to show you that there are indeed differential migration costs facing the young people and the middle-aged people. So the red curves demonstrate the fraction of people who are having hukou registration in inland and the rural area, those people who have the best draw of their, of the place. So those people are in the worst situation, born into the worst, inland and the rural hukou registration. And this curve demonstrates the fraction of them who migrate to coastal area and work in non-agricultural sector. Okay, so the blue line shows that's the numbers for 2000, and the red curve are for 2005. And the one with the plus sign are those people who are at a certain age, which is showing in the horizontal axis, but with high school education. But the one with the star on the line are the corresponding those people in inland rural registration, but without high school education. Okay, so we look at the fraction of them who actually migrated to the coastal non-agricultural area. So you can see that if you look at the red line, the highest one, that tells you that in 2005, there are 45% of 19, 20-year-old who are from inland and rural registration who actually migrated to work in the coastal area. However, you can see that after 35 or 40, after they become 40-year-old or so, the fraction migrants who work in coastal areas decline to close zero, so they actually go back. Okay? So these migrant workers are really young, and you can see that there's a huge number when they are 18 or 17 or 18 or 19, the time when they need to go to school. So here I want to show you then to the education attainment. So what I want to call your attention to the secondary education, this one I choose the 20 to 24 age group. I chose that group because they are done with high school education already. So I want you to look at the secondary, the column which says secondary, the percent of population. So that columns tell you the fraction of 20 and 24-year-old who have had some high school education. So we can see that the enrollment went up. But when you look at the next column, to say that the fraction of secondary completion means asking of those people who have been to high school, what's the fraction actually have completed high school? Now you see an increase in dropout rates. So you can see that in 1995, 82% of people who have some high school education who actually finished it. But when you go down 2000, 2005, and 2010, as young people are migrating to the East Coast to work, you can see that a smaller and smaller fraction of people who actually been to high school actually finished it, so they drop out from the high school. So who are those people who drop out? So I want to show these as the 4 lines demonstrate their hukou registration. The blue line, the bottom one, are those people who are registered to inland provinces and have a rural hukou. And the highest, the most upper line are those people who have urban hukou and in the coastal provinces. So you can see that for people have registration in urban area, coastal area, it pays to get higher education. So they have a higher enrollment in education when you look at it by age. When you look at this, enrollment has been going down by age, and those people in the inland and the rural hukou registration people actually have a higher dropout rates. Okay? So what we want to do, we want to write a model to demonstrate how a partial migration reform, which encourage young people to migrate versus the middle-aged people, actually may do harm in the long run. So our work is to bring dynamics to Eaton-Cotton trade special model. So EK model actually is a static model, okay, where they talk about how you allocate the labor into different regions and the sector, okay, and have equilibrium in different labor markets. And our paper is also close related to Tom and Drew, which Drew is my co-author on this project. But the difference is that we have the dynamic issue into play because we have human capital investment decisions. And also, another thing is related to author and others' paper on the effect of trade. Now we start to talk about, the trade may not always have positive effects in the United States. Some people would think China is the benefactor of the trade. Actually, we see that it matters how the migration reforms are done. If it's not done right, reduction in trade costs, enhancement in trade conditions actually can do harm in the long run. So we have a dynamic multi-sector, multi-region model. So we have human capital investment decisions of high school and college, so it's dynamic. So when people make a decision, high school education, they need to form expectations of wages in the future. Okay, so the wages are distributional concepts, the future wage across regions and across sectors, because they need to look at what way and across by different scales. So they need to form expectation to decide whether it's worthwhile to spend time at school to become more skilled worker. So this decision would provide us total amount of labor available by age, registration, and skill. And given the available labor, then there's a decision on migration. Okay? So the second part is EK model. It's a temporal, and the first part is dynamic model. Okay? So let me quickly run through that. The general model we have N regions. Each region corresponds to provinces and J sectors. And there's a Hooker registration there. Hooker registration, there's an indicator variable. And our migration costs depend upon origin which is origin is N star, and where the person works is N. J star indicates whether it's a rural or urban registration, and J is the sector the person works. A is the person's age, and the S is the person's scale. So we want to make the migration cost to be scaled, to be age specific, to capture the biased impact of partial migration reform on against the middle-aged people. And the decision at age 6, we actually allow high school dropouts. So the age 16, 17, 18, each year, this individual would decide whether he wants to stay in school where he gets positive utility but incurring learning costs because of inherent ability, or he become an unskilled worker. If he drop out high school, he's an unskilled worker. Or at age 19, he would decide once and for all whether he wants to go to college. So that's the human capital investment decision part. So once this person, we know that given the scale of the person and the age, he would decide which place he would work. Okay? What does that mean? Okay. So I'm actually going to jump a little bit fast. So the migration decision, this we have a log utility, okay? And the value function you can look at is that he needs to decide which region, which is N, and which sector, which is J, to work in. And given the region and the sector he have chose, he have enjoying consumption, utility from consumption, and then subtracted by the migration costs. So, and the next period, he's going to do it again. So this value function, given the extreme value distribution of the preference shocks, so we have a nice probability of choosing a region and a sector to work, which would depend upon the log of real income and migration costs. So just to relate to the data I have shown you. I have shown you the data for the real wage. I have shown you the data for nominal wage. We can compute real wage. And we also have the ratio of people of a certain registration migrate to a particular place. So we know the left-hand side. So given the initial stage, we can back out the migration costs. Okay? And that would allow us to do counterfactual experiments by potentially make the migration costs age uniform to look at what the impact they would have. So the production side and the trade side are standard EK model. So production, there are three. The production function, we have unskilled labor, lower scale labor, and high scale labor both enter into the production, and the land enter into the production. And the scale premium would be determined by the fraction of high scale labor versus lower scale labor. And also, we have the trade side like EK model. In general, we will have equilibrium where all the regions have trade and have a equilibrium of goods intermediate goods market. And also, we will have labor market equilibrium where people who are willing to migrate to different provinces make optimal decision, and then in total end up to the total labor supply. So that's equilibrium. So where we are right now, because this is a high dimensional case, if you are working on a dynamic model, you need to look at all the future wage distribution. So we decided to start with 2 regions and 2 sectors. So potentially move to 30 provinces and more sectors. So we are currently working on stationary equilibrium, and the next step is counterfactual experiments to use different type migration costs to work on that. So what I want you to take home with is that, the trade migration reforms may be beneficial in the short run, but in the long run, it depends upon how the migration reforms are carried out. So stay tuned for more results.
Thank you.